These men have just received a call and need to move out fast. They're part of the self-defense force in the city of Lviv in western Ukraine. For now, they're the authority here, having driven out politicians and police loyal to the former government. I'll be riding along on their patrol. Ivan is clearly on edge as we race through the city at 100 kilometres an hour. He's barely slept in days and pushed himself to his limits. At our destination, he tells me about the call-out. He says a casino was attacked. They'll be making sure no one gets hurt and nothing is plundered. But Ivan and his team are too late. The perpetrators are long gone. Whether criminals or residents venting anger at a suspected illegal casino, Ivan can't say. He secures the building and places it under guard. Ivan is a lawyer by profession, not a policeman, but these are extraordinary times. He says the self-defense force is needed until the situation stabilizes and the police can resume control. But that can only happen after the police ranks have been scrutinized and sanitized. Police headquarters in Lviv. This is where the opposition militia have set up their command center. From here, Sviatoslav Yavoritsky coordinates operations and maintains contact with patrols. He says he was a journalist before the revolution. Now he carries a gun and polices the city with other volunteers. He says in his country the police became robbers in the service of corrupt criminals. It was happening all over, in eastern and western Ukraine, perhaps to a different extent, but in principle it was the same everywhere. The public's resentment towards the regime, the police and state officials is still evident in Lviv. This precinct was sacked by an angry mob. The police who worked here have long fled. The self-defense force is now guarding the building. Andrei Kowalski is on the night watch. For months, the opposition activists protested on Kiev's Independence Square, the Maidan, against the government of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych. He says it's his duty to bring about a new Ukraine. He says if we don't do it, who will? Who will change the Ukrainian state? He respects Europe and the US, but Ukrainians have to establish order themselves. The time has come, he says. We've waited long enough for political change. The country has been continually pushed in the wrong direction since independence. The next morning in Lviv's old town. At first glance, the city's historic centre has changed little from my previous visits. But the recent upheaval in the country has left deep scars. Just a few streets from the city hall, I find candles, flowers and a wall of photographs. People here tell me these men were heroes who gave their lives for a free Ukraine. They were shot during the anti-government protests in Kiev. This woman says she hopes Ukraine will become the kind of country that these young men dreamed of. She says her generation built a country ruled by communists and oligarchs. That didn't help anyone. This man says their deaths should never be forgotten. Ukraine has to solve its economic crisis and see to it that the ruling class is completely replaced. But the country has a long and difficult road ahead. That was clear when I visited these barracks for interior troops. As the power struggle between the pro-Europe opposition and government supporters escalated in Lviv, it was attacked by protesters. The acting commander, Oleg Bely, says they didn't open fire, even when the mob demanded that they hand over their weapons. They wanted to take over the armory. Luckily, reason won out in the end. A passerby interrupts. "Are you lying to the camera?" she shouts. The soldiers should head to Kiev and put down the revolt. It shows just how difficult any process of reconciliation will be in Ukraine. Later that evening, I meet again with Andrei Kowalski. He invited me to his home before heading off to Kiev.
Підійти до столу. Мені? Так. До того, що в хаті? Ні, до цього.
While his wife makes sandwiches for the trip, he swaps messages on Facebook with protesters still occupying Independence Square. The revolution isn't over, he says. It will only be over when we've replaced the entire political class. And by that, he also means opposition leaders who were in power after the Orange Revolution. That's being demanded on the Maidan. Buses to Kiev still depart from Lviv every evening. For the past months, they've shuttled opposition activists like Andrei to the capital. The free service is mainly financed by donations. I ride along for the 500 kilometres through western Ukraine. Andrei Kowalski and the others strike up a folk song. The months of tension appear to melt away. The journey has all the atmosphere of a school excursion. And no one seems ready to sleep. Our early morning destination isn't Independence Square, but the presidential residence Meshigorye, 15 kilometres outside Kiev. It's become a symbol of corruption among Ukraine's political elite. Andrei Kowalski and the other activists walk around the 140-hectare grounds. It was only after Yanukovych fled that ordinary Ukrainians were allowed a look inside here. Before that, it was strictly off-limits to the public. Andrei says he's proud that all this has been taken away from Yanukovych, but he's also ashamed that they allowed him to steal so much. He says no one in the world has stolen so much from his people to build something like this. He says no one else should ever live here. Ukraine's new president has to be different from all others. They should get an income that's equal to a minimum wage, around €100. I ask whether any Ukrainian politician will be prepared to make that sacrifice. Andrei also has his doubts. He says they're waiting for new, fresh personalities, activists that have made a name for themselves on the Maidan. He has no faith in opposition politicians. We finally reach Independence Square. Many protesters are still camped out here. They're refusing to leave until they're sure their fight is won, and their dream of a European Ukraine is a reality. Andrei Kowalski pauses in front of the photos of the protesters who were shot down. A friend of his was among those killed in the protests. He says he mourns them, those that he knew were the future of Ukraine. They could have become the new elite to move the country forward. Their deaths will be the foundation on which they'll build a new Ukraine. Andrei Kowalski believes in the future of his homeland. But others on the square fear for the unity of the country. Will the Russian-speaking East accept a transition of power? And what will happen in Crimea, where Russia exerts a strong influence? Of course there are risks, this man says. In Kharkiv and Donetsk, ordinary citizens don't dominate the discussions, but influential local clans who demand more autonomy for the East. He says that worries him. This woman says no one wants the country to fall apart, but if things continue, if politicians only do what suits them and don't include all citizens, then it could happen. That worries many people here on the Maidan. According to this man, people in Crimea are against Yanukovych. They were too afraid to protest at first because they were intimidated, threatened and beaten. Now they see it's possible to win against the powerful. He says they'll rise up and won't live in fear anymore. The protesters on Independence Square longed for and fought for political change in Ukraine. But it's still not clear whether they'll ultimately achieve it.
Я, звісно, не кажу про всіх людей, але така проблема є, і це теж треба обговорювати, так чи ні? У нас є досить багато людей.